So I just want to say croeso, welcome to everyone today. So we've got Chris Williams and Richard Marsh. So I'm going to hand over to Richard Marsh from Prifysgol Cymru, University of Wales, to chair the session for us today. Thank you, Richard.
Okay, thanks very much, Carrie. So looking, I can see we've got 50 participants. That's fantastic. It's good. On 51, I'll just keep watching the ticker as it goes up. That's great to see so many people here today. I really hope we get a lot out of this session. I know that given the things that Chris is working on at the moment, and given the opportunities and the future of the South Wales Industrial Cluster, that there's a lot of interest in what will be presented today. And from the perspective of somebody chairing it, I hope that generates a lot of questions and points for discussion. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Chris, who said he's going to be quite flexible with how long he talks. So we'll see how long that goes on for. And I will keep an eye on the chat box if people, for various reasons, possibly even bandwidth, if people don't want to ask questions verbally, by all means put them in the chat, and I can read them out on your behalf. Just make sure that you're well identified. So Chris, over to you, and good luck with your presentation.
Thank you, Richard. Hope I live up to that build up. So probably like most of you, we've had a day of sat in front of screens and talking, listening. So I hope I can keep you entertained. So thanks a lot for joining me. I'm going to go through the developing South Wales Industrial Cluster. First of all, I feel I have to sincerely thank UKCCSRC, particularly John, of course, John Gibbons. John was instrumental in supporting and helping us get going, giving me advice all times of day and night on the phone, just sort of talking through and helping us shape what we think South Wales should look like. So any funding bodies, etc., listening, then just want to say that, because it was really important steerage at the beginning, and John's still on the end of the phone, and the others are, and it's a good network for us to keep touching base with the research support that's out there. So thank you. Secondly, just to remind everyone, I suppose, where the South Wales Industrial Cluster sort of sprung out of. I was Tata Steel, I am Tata Steel. I was seconded in 2016 to Flexis, the Welsh energy project, as a £24 million EU funded project. I was seconded from Tata Steel to be sort of the industrial link into that project. And through that project, I started to be able to understand what the academics were working on for industry, but also it enabled me to spend a lot more time, I suppose, in London and work with, at the time, Claire Perry's task force, etc. And that got me networked into the other industrial clusters. So Teesside in particular at the time, and still are now, really supportive of us and encouraging South Wales to come together as an industrial grouping. We linked in obviously with HyNet closely, and then Humberside and Scotland as well. So thanks to all the clusters, and thanks to the Flexis project, because that gave us the sort of basis to start from, and the principal investigators, the professors like Richard, etc., all their knowledge. When we started to map out what everyone was working on, we looked at the industries. I thought, blimey, actually, you can start to see a net zero future. So out of that, then we managed to get another EU funded project called RICE, Reduced Industrial Carbon Emissions, which is about scaling up and demonstrating some of the technologies that the university is working on, and they're currently being installed at the moment, which are quite good demonstrators for us to learn from as industry. And I suppose if the way we sort of phrase it is, Flexis wrote the script, RICE was our dress rehearsal, and now the South Wales Industrial Cluster is our full-blown performance now on making it happen and turning research into reality, I suppose. As a reminder, South Wales, in terms of the Industrial cluster's mission is shown on the diagram on the left-hand side, the second largest CO2 emitting industrial region in the UK, mainly, of course, because it's got steelworks and one oil refinery, and Humberside's got steelworks and 2 refineries, and plus then you've got chemical plants added on, which you typically see in the other clusters as well. It's the diagram on the right-hand side from the Committee of Climate Change, just sort of backing up the CO2 emission levels. And what we knew as industries, of course, was, I suppose, me then as Tata Steel, I should add, I'm now seconded into Industry Wales, which is an arm's length Welsh Government body. I'm still an employee of Tata, but seconded into Industry Wales to help develop and grow the cluster. So I have to thank as well, contractually, it's in our grant offer letters, UKRI, for the funding for the cluster plan and deployment project, which I'll talk through a bit in a moment. But again, KTN in establishing and developing the cluster, KTN and Innovate UK were key to us pulling together and understanding what the future could look like, and also understand the shape of what the funding streams might be, therefore encouraging us to come together and develop our plans. So, South Wales, oil refinery, LNG import terminals, steelworks, chemical plants, cement works, chemical plants, nickel refinery, breweries, food and drink, a right mix of, and paper, of course, a right mix of manufacturing bases. We've also got then, in terms of power, we've got Europe's largest CCGT in Milford Haven, 2.1 gigawatts. We've got energy from waste plants, and we've got other CCGTs, which are in a various states of running, but also a couple of small biomass plants as well, and a new developing energy waste plant. So when you put those together, you get sort of like, as shown on the screen, around about 16 million tonnes a year, 10 from industry and 6 from power. We know as a sort of an opportunity for the region, we've got huge LNG import terminals. Around about 20 to 30% of UK natural gas comes in through Milford Haven, or can come through Milford Haven. We've got huge tidal range, so surely we can do something with that. We've got huge offshore wind capability with the floating offshore in the Celtic Sea being explored, so hopefully that will come through and develop. And of course, in terms of gas distribution, we connect in and feed in, so we can support the decarbonisation of the southwest of the UK. So that's sort of the region, the industries, and the opportunities down the bottom in terms of us. Okay, how are we going to get rid of that 16 million tonnes a year of CO2? What are we going to do? How are we going to maximise the use of these potentials? Then, of course, we come to our recognised biggest challenge, the lack of, or the lack of known geological storage for CO2 in South Wales. So the need for us to explore shipping. But of course, we are interested in other options as well, and developing an understanding again of is there really any geological storage that we could be utilising. But CO2 shipping, we think at the moment, is our way forward in terms of carbon capture storage. So with our cluster plan project, we came together. We had our first meeting as a cluster in January 2019. We started to shape and form. We're still in informal grouping, really. We are. I'm the sort of nominated lead. We've got a steering team, and we take actions and come together. It was almost a community project at the moment. You know, it was at the beginning. It was Chris from Tata, Steve from Valero, Catherine from Rockwool, trying to understand, okay, how do we develop a future for our region and make sure that our industries are going to stay and we create and maintain jobs for our future generation, so our children and our children's children. So we came together in January 2019, worked with KTN, Innovate UK and the universities in terms of understanding what things look like, where things are going. And that enabled us then, thanks to CR Plus, the consulting firm, we managed to put our bids in for Cluster Plan Phase 1 and then followed that through into Phase 2. And during that cluster plan, we're looking very carefully, of course, in terms of efficiencies and carbon dioxide avoidance. So engineering, resource efficiency, fuel switching, electrification, hydrogen, biofuels, what are the options for the different sites? The smart networks, or as we're calling it, clean growth hubs, where you're looking for industrial symbiosis with new industries or agricultural greenhouses, etc., that you can pull in to work around your industrial site. Carbon capture utilization, as Tata Chemicals have done, as we're looking to do with the few small projects that we've got on, what can we do to really reuse that CO2 within the site, or what opportunities are there outside? And then, of course, last but not least, CCS. And we recognise with the industry types we've got there, so steel, oil, cement, that CCS will probably be the main way that we will reduce our CO2 emission. But still, the others are important. And in trying to get the region to net zero, in some ways, the others then become more harder and more of a challenge, because CCS then becomes sort of apparently easy. You just collect it, put it on a ship, and off it goes. Whereas the smaller companies, where we're really trying to understand how do you decarbonize a biscuit factory up the Neath Valley, it starts to become more of a challenge. So we're going through those 5 steps for the different factories, the different industries within our region. So what we do know, though, of course, each of those steps is completely dependent on the infrastructure around that region. So in terms of electrical distribution, hydrogen supply, low carbon electricity supply, and of course, in terms of carbon capture and storage, how are we going to get the CO2 away? Do we need regional networks? Are we going to be able to run undersea pipes to connect and use the sea to effectively transport our CO2 to a single point to export the CO2 from? Or are we going to have our on-land CO2 capability as well? So we're trying to work our way through and understand what that's going to look like as we go through and understand the 5 steps. South Wales Industrial Cluster is quite big. It's quite big partly because it's UKCCSRC's fault. It's John Gibbons' fault, because when we were talking through, the cluster started off as just being Port Talbot, which is the middle. But then as we started to explore it and talking to John, it was now we need to go west, and we need to pick up the oil refinery and the CCGT. And that starts to make a little bit more sense then in terms of quantity and economies of scale, etc. But also then, as we looked at hydrogen and carbon capture utilization, we wanted to go east, because that's where the sort of chemical works were, and also existing SMR and hydrogen make. So the South Wales Industrial Cluster grew really as we started to explore those 5 points really, in terms of what did we need to pull that in. It was just lucky at the time that there was a Severn Estuary in the way, which broke us apart from Bristol and Avonmouth. But I'm glad to say that we're now in discussions with the West of England Combined Authority, and hopefully we'll be working and helping them develop and map their way further forward, because again, it obviously makes sense for us to work closely with them. So we broke ourselves down into those mini clusters, trying to understand the what we're calling clean growth hubs around the smart networks, and understanding the infrastructure that we'll need for the industries within those. And then, of course, that's underneath the umbrella of the cluster. Of course, then in parallel to that, we need to understand the policies and financials. So Bain's expert work groups, we've now got a Welsh Government monthly steering meeting as well. And then, so through that, we'll understand the policies and the business models. And then, of course, it'll be a bit of a sort of iterative process as we go through cluster plan, in terms of us understanding the correct options for each site, how we're going to get the infrastructure to that site, and then what the economics look like as we start then to develop our route to net zero. So over the next 2 years, as part of the cluster plan, that's effectively what we'll be going through that process. These are the sort of mini clusters in terms of where we are, and of course what that does, it starts to tie us into Cardiff, Swansea and Newport City developments, and understanding which way they're going, because obviously if we're piping hydrogen, then we need to make sure we're working and liaising with the city and the city deals. So in terms of clean growth hubs, as I said, that symbiosis, forming the mini cluster in terms of understanding the site, its wastes, and what opportunities, what land, what renewables, really trying to move that that net zero philosophy, building out from the site, developing out, trying to avoid carbon dioxide emission, and limit the amount of carbon we would have to store. Also then, of course, that brings in wider benefits, and we've got different work streams then in terms of other sectors, tying in with Welsh Government low carbon delivery plans, etc., and just trying to develop all the different work streams we need to make sure we're maximising the benefits of industry in each individual area, and attract new industries as well. Some of them will be transitional options for us, and some of them will be final. But again, carbon dioxide avoidance and carbon capture utilisation will play a key part through our developing cluster plan. So we end up with a sort of regional opportunity where we know we've got huge LNG import capability. We know we need CO2 shipping because we've got steel, chemicals, and oil. So we know we can start blue hydrogen make, we can start distributing that around South Wales, we can start the hydrogen economy, but also we can start then CO2 shipping, or we can start decarbonising steel, cement and chemicals. In parallel to that, of course, we've got growing renewables capability in terms of onshore and offshore. So we start to then shape and develop the hydrogen plan and the CO2 shipping plan. Our deployment project, which is led by Costain, incorporates then engineering studies which will back up, confirm and develop through to final investment decision some of the technologies that we know we'll need anyway. So for example, CO2 shipping, so the steelworks working through its options. We've got some circular economy activity. We've got Lanzatech in terms of steelworks gases to ethanol, ethanol to kerosene, and kerosene off then for chemical feedstock. We've got Tarmac, we've got ABP, so Associated British Ports, and we've got Milford Haven Ports Authority, Progressive Energy, and we've got Wales and West Utilities then in terms of determining the start of their system redesign based around and developing and working with a cluster plan and the deployment project. And of course, we've got Shell come on board now with us as a new partner for blue hydrogen and CO2 shipping. And we've got the oil refinery in terms of determining and starting down its road of carbon capture storage off the refinery. So we got a nice mix there of partners and projects, and I should have mentioned Lightsource BP, of course, because that's our developing green hydrogen capability, so renewables electrolysis with maybe some ammonia. We're going to see how that fits in to local needs and requirements, and which industries we can align that to properly. So we've got a nice mix and blend of projects that backs up the wider plan. But the key new partner for us in that, in terms of This subject is Shell for CO2 shipping. And I've missed RWE, didn't I? Sorry, RWE. I included RWE in terms of understanding the future of Pembroke Power Station with hydrogen, CCS. So there's some exciting developments built in around that. So the deployment project is doing engineering studies. The cluster plan is developing that high level vision and map for moving things forward. So as I've said there, we've got CO2 shipping, we've got blue hydrogen, green hydrogen, reduced carbon intensity refining products, utilizing hydrogen for low carbon electricity, carbon recycling for a new carbon economy. So that's the LanzaTech typically, and with all the different developments around that. Industrial fuel switching, CO2 transport, cement, and CO2 shipping from the developing Simic Atlantis plant in the east. Then starting to connect that in, then that's where Wales and West Utilities come in terms of them then starting in parallel, but obviously line 2 and with the cluster plan and deployment in terms of understanding what that means for their gas distribution network and its conversion to hydrogen. What does that mean? As well as West Utilities obviously cover the west of England as well, or parts of the west of England. So that again acts as a bridge for us further east into Avonmouth, Bristol, and then further down as well into Devon, Cornwall, etc. And as we showed earlier in terms of the national natural gas distribution system, we feed in off that in terms of Milford Haven. So coming back to the Milford Haven being the sort of hydrogen gateway for South Wales, it can also then develop into the hydrogen gateway for the west of England as well. So the discussions were, should the South Wales industrial cluster be the Southwest industrial cluster? Probably because it's devolved governments would keep it separate, but we'll see where we go on that one. But we need to be working closely together and aligned to make sure we make the most of each other. As you might have seen, they're now out to tender for pulling, well, I think it's finished actually, in terms of pulling in quotes and proposals for helping them develop their pathway. That then, of course, you might have seen in the National Grid project, developing hydrogen backbone, showing how all the different clusters can potentially interlink and connect, and how from that you can then start to attack the rest of the country. Okay, so CO2 shipping. This is a picture from Bain's industrial decarbonisation strategy, which I should congratulate Bain on. I think there are gaps and bits, but I think it's a great place to start, and it's really good to see policies and direction and ideas and actions on themselves in a document, one place, making it easier for us. So as we're developing our cluster plan, and no doubt the other clusters will be thinking the same, that we will be, as part of the UKRI funded project, we will be developing a UK cluster plan. That's yet to be shaped and formed, but you would hope that the individual cluster plans tie in with the UK cluster plan that ties in with the industrial decarbonisation strategy, and therefore we're all talking the same language, we're all talking this, we've got the same headings, breakdown of structures, and we can show hopefully some proper alignment between us all and with Bain as well. So us trying to explore shipping was a struggle for us at the beginning, because we didn't have a partner with us actively exploring it. Again, thanks to UKCCSRC, we'd had some discussions with potential shipping companies, and we'd gained knowledge from the rest of the world as well through UKCCSRC. So that was useful background for us, and knowledge gaining and understanding which way we should go and who we should be speaking to as well. With Shell now on board with us, that starts now to become very real for us. So that's great. Of course, advantages of shipping, as shown in the industrial decarbonisation strategy, there are a few areas which you you wouldn't call, I suppose, industrial clusters in terms of the Thames, but of course it is in terms of Project Cavendish and trying to work out a plan for hydrogen make for London. So we've been speaking to National Grid, speaking to Cavendish, speaking to Thames Estuary Growth Board in terms of understanding their hydrogen plans. We're obviously liaised closely with Lindsay at Southampton, and so the Solent cluster as that's becoming, and she's obviously trying her hardest to get things up and running down there, and I know that's growing, which is great. And then of course we've got, which isn't shown on here, we've got Bristol Avonmouth. We started to have discussions there, and hopefully that they will grow into well, active support and active projects and active shared explorations for CO2 shipping and hydrogen. And on their diagram, they've got Londonderry. So I might need some help there if anybody's got connections, somebody I can speak to up there, because we're going to pull together a sort of CO2 shipping group. So they're mainly in the south, obviously, but we'll gladly pull in Londonderry and understand that. And of course, so that's in terms of CO2 export. But of course, in terms of CO2 import, we obviously liaise closely with the other clusters and are trying to understand the options for us going forward. The cluster sequencing process that's out at the moment, which I think there's a briefing on at the moment, which is all the Teams notifications we're coming in from, going through briefing on the cluster sequencing process and how we could potentially fit into that in terms of we haven't got a store, and we understand the importance of getting the CO2 stores away, but we would like to think that as well as getting the stores away, they work on CO2 import capability, because we don't want to be sat here waiting for too long before the stores are up and running, before we can get our shipping capability up and running, and before they can actually accept CO2. So we need some parallel working. We need maybe a 0.8 point B on the 10-point plan for CO2 shipping, or we need an 11 point on the 10-point plan, one of the other, to try and accelerate and grow that. And I think that's where that CO2 shipping group might develop into a sort of CO2 shipping lobby to try and get some acceleration of business model and an understanding of support going forward. And of course, we know from the northern clusters as well, which we work closely with, and obviously essential for our plans, that they are keen to explore CO2 shipping. They all see it as opportunities in terms of import to add to their business cases for their stores, but also maybe for export if they've got trouble with their store, if their store is down for unplanned maintenance or planned maintenance, maybe they need the capability to export. So it makes sense for them to explore shipping. And most importantly, of course, it makes sense for all of us to be liaising closely and working together on CO2 shipping standards. You know, we wouldn't want to be developing CO2 export capability from South Wales and we can only export it to one cluster, one of the northern clusters. It should be that we should be able to export to any store that's available, and ideally as well, of course, offers least cost. So you would imagine for South Wales that Merseyside, as shown on here, the Northwest cluster, Liverpool Bay, would provide us with the least cost option. So you would think we'd like that, but if they're down, then we need maybe the ability to work up with Scotland. But it might be that CO2 import doesn't work for one of the other clusters as well, whereas it does for the other. So maybe Acorn is the best option for us. So it'll vary and depend, but of course the advantage of shipping, it gives you that flexibility of destination. You're not tied to a pipe. You can do partial loads, etc. You know, you can preempt by the production schedule of the steelworks, you know, when it's going to make it CO2. And and obviously it's making CO2 all the time, but what I mean is the relative quantity. So as the weekly tonnage of steel varies, and you can see that in the production schedule going forward, you can predict how much CO2 you're going to make, and therefore how much CO2 you're going to need to take away, and therefore you can predict how many ships you're going to need on which days. So you can start to be maybe a little bit clever in terms of what you're doing. Obviously introducing local storage, which is something we'll have to understand and model what scale that would need to be at, and look to build and develop around that. So Londonderry, if anybody's got any contacts, if anybody on here is from that region, then please connect, and I look forward to talking. We're also working closely with the Black Country. So the Black Country got funding for cluster plan, and so that's obviously in the middle of the country, so that we're learning quite a lot off them. I think we will. They're sort of typically sort of medium SME size businesses, so we can do a lot of learning between us. But of course they have the issue of where they're going to get their hydrogen, if they're going to be creating CO2, where's that going to go? So it's a good sort of sharing and learning opportunity. A different challenge they've got, but a lot of when we look at getting to net zero, apart from CCS, of course, then the challenge becomes very similar. So we can learn off those. As I mentioned, Shell have come on board with us now for deployment phase 2. They are obviously partnered with quite a few CCS projects globally in the UK and Europe, which obviously offers us quite a lot of excitement in terms of understanding the opportunities. They're also keen to make sure that we develop and evolve shipping, as it says there in point 2, in terms of scaling up and cost reduction, similar to LNG, but also keen to push and progress and develop the flexibility. And for flexibility, we need to make sure that all the clusters are working on common standards in terms of CO2, in terms of ship import, export capability. So that's really, really exciting for us. I think it's right to say that as industries, we were keen to explore carbon capture storage, but without there being a partner exploring export, there was little point in industries exploring capture. Yes, in principle at a high level, but not so much in detail. Now we have that partner exploring, it makes much more sense for industries and be more willing. But also I think what's important here, it sends big messages back globally to the multinational companies that are mainly owners of the industries in South Wales, where there wasn't a known CO2 option for CCS. There wasn't a development for the net zero infrastructure in the region to help their South Welsh branch get to net zero. You may understand then why the industries were maybe bottom of the queue for investment in the longer term. But now we've had this funding thanks to UK government and Innovate UK. Of course, we're now able to show around and sell back globally to the multinational headquarters. Look what the region's developing. The region is trying now to develop net zero infrastructure to retain your presence, but also hopefully attract new and inward investment as well, and grow the skills and capabilities locally. So that's been huge for us, and Costain are running the deployment project. So we have to thank Costain for making that link and bringing that new partner in. I have got a bit of a question here. It's still sort of thought that we don't have local geological storage of CO2 in South Wales. We do know that, I've got a paper I know pretty well from Cardiff University here, just to show the diagram and reference the report. But what actually are the options again? Is it worth us re-evaluating what's there? What other options are there other than the coal field that's shown on the diagram? And what help could we pull in answering that question? And I think that will do me, because I didn't realize I've been talking for 40 minutes there, haven't I? Sorry, Richard.
No, that's absolutely fine, Chris. Thank you very much for that talk. I think there's some really good, useful and exciting information in there. I feel that I can hear a ripple of applause going through the audience. So for that, and I'm sure people will acknowledge that later. I'm going to use the chair's privilege and be the first person to ask you a question, and then I'll go over to the chat just to see if there's anything on there. My question is based around how industrially focused this is, and obviously the state in which carbon capture, storage, utilization is within the United Kingdom. What do you think that the industrial partners are getting out of this cluster? Why are they involved? What's motivating them? Is it fear of legislative pressure? Is it opportunity to potentially break into new markets and make more money? And I expect you'll probably say something like they've all got a different take on it. But are you getting any sense of an overriding desire for what they want out of it?
I think if you look at the bigger emitters, you will probably find that their corporate headquarters have declared a net zero target by 2050 and a reduction by 2040 or 2030. They are, one of several companies dotted round the globe from that multinational company. So the local company to us will be trying to understand strategically how it can fit to its corporate long-term targets, and B, as somebody who's working in the region, try to protect a long-term employment and jobs for that region. So I think it is, as you say, is a mix of reasons why different industries are involved. Some of them can see short-term benefits. Some of them are under pressure from their customers or their customers' customers to start to declare or show CO2 reduction plans. I think for some, maybe it doesn't go any more than wanting to see CO2 reduction plans and wanting to show that you're trying to fit into the net zero future. But for others, it's starting to feed down as much more as a request to see a date for when they are likely to be net zero by. So there's a little bit of pressure coming that way, and I would say more and more. And of course, in terms of shareholders' investment, corporate social responsibility, for the companies to show they're part of something, a movement, a regional plan that's trying to develop its way through to secure its future and profits for shareholders, I suppose, ultimately.
Okay, good, thanks. Right, a quick plea from Caris is if you do want to ask a question, you can use the raise your hand function, and then somebody said, where is the raise your hand function? So if you look along the bottom menu of your screen, you'll see several icons. One of them says reactions. So you could send a smiley face, or you can click raise hand, and then we'll come to you. Right, so Jim Harvey has posted a link to the Industrial Decarbonisation Challenge that people might find helpful, so thank you for that, Jim. And then the first question is from Duncan Edwards, which is, I hope the Coal Authority is involved as a stakeholder. So has the Coal Authority been involved with this at all, Chris?
Do you know, they're not yet, but that's on our plan too. So thank you. Yeah.
Okay, good.
I should explain. I'll within the cluster plan, we have got a developing stakeholder engagement tool. We've just, as for Tuesday, we went through, and most of you will know what this is like. We've been through our monitoring officer report from our mobilisation phase. So we were glad to get that out of the way, and now we're back down to, right, okay, let's start putting this together and start ticking the box. So no, that's a good steer. Thank you.
Okay. Max Richards has asked, have you evaluated carbonate mineralization or mineral trapping like they're doing in Iceland? I won't read the full question out, but have you got any plans for that? Have you heard of that?
I think we will be planning to, as we explore our carbon capture utilization options from the different sites. I'll be honest, at this moment in time, I don't quite know how we're going to go through the process of identification of technologies and system design, but those 5 boxes I showed on that top right hand side for each plant, we've got a room, thanks to universities, that we're going to use as our net zero room, just as stakeholder engagement room, where there's so much information in spreadsheets, PowerPoints, so we're literally going to put things on the wall and just use it as a sort of talk through room, a war room as we would call it, where we can try then and pull through ideas. Obviously there'll be cross-cutting themes, technologies, and we'll be trying to look through and match. So will we be putting out calls for support for CCU, for example, calls for support for CO2 and CCS? Then probably yes.
Okay, good. So Max is happy to talk about that if you want, so I think he'll make
yeah. And just coming back, that's where, of course, working closely, academia, government and industry working together, we can really bounce off each other and pull in from all. Sorry. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, I like this one. This one's from Freya. Has there been any work looking at the potential, particularly the Cardiff and Newport mini clusters, to use rail CO2 transportation to integrate with other clusters, etc.? It's an interesting one.
Not yet. And you're right to point that out. That might well be, and that again, when we start talking about Black Country, links in with Black Country, then potentially, because you're right, there is a main line connecting South Wales nicely.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Robin Irons has got an exam question for you. I've got a feel for the cost of transport of CO2 and how it will vary as a function of the shipping miles. How much more is it likely to cost to move a ton of CO2 to Humber rather than Liverpool Bay? You answer to within about 20 pence, if you can, please.
Yeah, I would reference the Element Energy report, and I would say it was going to be shipping to Humber will be around about £12.30, shipping to Merseyside £9.50, and shipping to St Fergus is £12.40. But that we need to cover that, don't we, with Element Energies. That was a desktop study trying to understand as best they could at the time for bays. So what we'll be doing with the deployment project is trying to back those numbers up and really understand those numbers in more detail.
Mm-hmm. Oh, good. I can see in the chat that Eliane from Element Energy has put a link to that.
Oh, brilliant.
So there we go.
Yeah, we still use that report as our Bible. Well done. Thank you.
Oh, good. I thought you were going to say, well, I'm not sure. That was really good. It's obviously there's been a lot of consideration on that.
Well, I think Element, to be fair, were very clear. You know, it was. I don't want to do you any disservice because you've said this yourself. It's good work, really good work with the information they knew at the time. Mm. And as we do these proper engineering studies, we'll really start to understand how that we can firm up the numbers.
Mm. Maybe another question on shipping. That's good. It seems to be interesting. So there seem to be a lot of clusters. This is from Tobias Lockwood. There seem to be a lot of clusters in the UK and abroad planning to ship to the same small number of North Sea storage sites. Has there been any high-level planning on whether enough capacity will be there in time to receive all of this CO2, or the schedule will need developing perhaps for more storage? We get a big traffic jam.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea for a project, that is, isn't it?
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know the answer to that one. I suspect not, but I do know that there are some research projects that have gone in to do that sort of modelling, but I don't know if it goes to that extent even. So I think that's a good call, good challenge.
I would put that one on the UKCCSRC, and I would
think
right,
so.
I'm going to stick my neck out that somebody studied that. That's about as specific as as I can help with that one. Ruby Ray would like to ask, what's the timeline? I assume the timeline for the cluster.
Yeah, we are. The cluster plan runs to 2023 funding, the deployment in 2024. So we should have engineering designs done for some of what we've shown you there. The business models from Bain, because at the end of the day, it all comes down to economics, and economics will drive the investment and choice and direction. They're due out next year. I think CO2 shipping is going to be opportunity, but a challenge for Bain. So we hope they work on that parallel. But theoretically, yeah, you could see the first ships leaving 2028, 2030. I don't know how big those ships will be. Maybe there'll be small starters that we can borrow from somewhere first. Let's see.
Okay. Duncan Edwards has said that Southern Ireland are looking at CCUS.
Yeah.
Oh, my screen moved. There it is. Into Kinsale Head oil field. Which do you think there's any potential for SWIC in that?
Yeah, we haven't spoken to them for probably a year. But we do have links, so potentially, yeah. It's only we do know it's only 200 kilometers away from us as well, so it is pipeable as well. So we are paying attention to their developments. But we know as well they signed an MOU as well for shipping. We know that they've got growing offshore new renewables capability for green hydrogen. So very similar to us in that regard, yeah.
Is there a natural gas link along there or not? Naivety, no.
I don't know, actually. Don't think so.
No, yeah, I think they're in the north.
I think you're right. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And then
I suppose picking up your point there, you're right. They're very similar to us, but they haven't got that gas, the gas link yet. But I meant they're similar to us in terms of having to potentially need CO2 shipping.
Okay. Eliane has also added to flag up a study that they did in collaboration with Syntef, Brevik Engineering and IOM Law for IAGHG. So there's a link for that as well. Which
okay, thank you. Thanks.
Okay, good. So with 10 minutes to go, I just got to the bottom. So unless anybody's raised their hand, I've got another question for you here. What do you think the low-hanging fruit is? What's going to be so that you can, you can celebrate success early? Is there anything you can tell us about what you think the nearest to market or the low-hanging fruit or the thing that has got a good chance of short-term success within the cluster is?
I think in terms of this, CCS, then it's probably the opportunities in Milford Haven that will go first in terms of LNG import, oil refining, power generation. You've got a nice little mix there, yeah, to start things moving practically. I think what that will do, it will help the other emitters then start to know timescales and investment plans.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. It's good.
I think Milford will be the first to go.
The target.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. So Eliane has their hand raised. Would you like to ask your question? You can unmute yourself. Okay, if not, I'll go to Ian.
Hello. Sorry, can you hear me now?
Oh, yes, go ahead.
Oh, fine. Yes, some problem with the microphone, obviously. It's only 2021. Hi, thanks, Chris, for the great presentation. Very insightful. Eliane Puchedo from Element Energy. And I actually was curious to understand on the capture side, I'm really impressed by the variety of emitters, which I think is a real strength, and by just the sheer number. Are you planning to go with a staged approach and only kind of start with a core subgroup and then progressively build up, or are you trying to go all in quite soon? Do you have any? Have you published anything on this subject?
No, not yet. And I think it will be very staged.
Okay.
If that answers your question, yeah, I think
Yeah,
it will be staged. I think it will start in the west, and then it will depend. As you know, the biggest emitter is obviously the steelworks. Steelworks faces really difficult decision in terms of which way it can go, as you will know, and the transition to that destination will be really tricky. So I think the steelworks will need all the help it can get in terms of deciding what it's going to do, and then moving its way. So I think even the steelworks, on its own will be a transitional step.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, good. Now I can't work out. Ian, did you have a question, or? I'm not sure.
Yes, I have got a question.
Fire away.
Well, I wanted to bring up the subject of Wayleaves in the sense that, well, if I could go back to the beginning of your talk, you were talking about, you had a map of natural gas pipelines throughout the United Kingdom. And so my first starting point there is to sort of ask about the possibility of running carbon dioxide dedicated pipelines along the same routes, therefore getting from somewhere the likes of South Wales, even if you have to go through England to get there, using the actual Wayleaves, the routes which exist for existing natural gas pipelines. Presumably with any network you're having, the major part of the problem is to actually get the rights of way to build the thing in the first place. And once that's done, you can then piggyback on top of what's already there. Presumably, technically, it'd be possible to have a parallel CO2 pipe along a natural gas pipe, along the same stretch of land. Now, the other thing is that I was going to mention was related to this. There's quite a lot of political talk now in Wales to reverse some of the beaching cuts, and there's talk about, for example, Carmarthen to Aberystwyth and Aberystwyth to Bangor reopening railways.
Yeah.
Now, it may be that Network Rail still exists, still own Wayleaves there. I don't know. It may be they still hold the rights. But even if they have to be renegotiated, there's possibly an opportunity for cost sharing there, where if the Welsh government has any plans to put in a line from Carmarthen essentially up to Bangor, there's an opportunity perhaps there to sort of look at the sharing the costs of putting in the same route, a CO2 pipeline, for example.
Yeah, it is an idea. I mean, I think coming back to our staged transitions, I think the first focus will be coastal, but then as we start to go away from the coast and start to and understand the wider implications, then that is an idea. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Cheers.
I have a suspicion we may run over a little. Is that a problem for you, Chris? Anybody else can obviously leave if they need to, but
no, I'm okay.
That's okay if we go. Okay, fine.
Yeah.
I think Bruce Adderley may have left, but he said I have to leave shortly. Great to see how far things have come since the initial UKCCSRC meeting back in 2016. Pat on the back from him there. Thank you, Bruce. Question from Jane.
I suppose just to say that the Transforming Foundation Industries Fund that Bruce is running is indirectly helping us quite a bit as well, because we're doing material and energy mapping for the region as part of that, which is helping us pull through decarbonisation opportunities.
Okay, good. So we have a question from James Bain, who I know has an interest in hydrogen. So he said, is the cluster expecting to become a net importer or net exporter of hydrogen? Do we understand what the demand might be and the capacity? That's a 20.
I think that's a big question. I would think it'll go through phases. I think maybe exporter at the beginning. LNG, blue hydrogen, exporting round to the west. Then green hydrogen as that grows. And who knows what the long term is in terms of import of hydrogen, import of ammonia.
Okay. In a similar vein, Duncan Edwards has asked, Milford Haven progressing a hydrogen-fired boiler in a property, but Teesside are building a hydrogen plant. Is the cluster, are you thinking of playing small or big?
In terms of hydrogen? I
think so. I think by all means, Duncan, chip in. It's a bit difficult to get the focus of the question there. Hydrogen-fired boiler, but Teesside are building a GW.
Oh, I think, is he referring to Teesside's building CCGT? And Milford's looking at converting to hydrogen. To be honest, I don't know the size of the Teesside proposal, actually, the CCGT size in megawatts electric. So I couldn't answer whether big or small.
Okay, that's fine.
Hope that's okay as an answer.
We'll see.
But I suppose Teesside is having to build a CCGT, whereas South Wales has already got one. So, but of course, yeah.
Okay. Okay, so Tobias has said, I think the question is just saying that perhaps you're not being ambitious enough on the height.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Which is similar to James's question, I think.
Yeah.
In terms of which way might it flow? How big might the production be?
I think I suppose the advantage of LNG to hydrogen, and I mean the floating offshore wind capability is something in the order of, predicted recent capabilities like 50 gigawatts or something. So theoretically, there's a lot of hydrogen make potential from that, and of course 20-30% of UK natural gas into hydrogen. I probably wouldn't go that far, would it? In terms of not everything's going to convert to hydrogen. So I suppose there's ambition there in the capability, but we are behind the other clusters, in terms of where we are. Well, we were the new kids on the block, and thanks to the other clusters, we've got to where we are. And I suppose the Solent cluster now is the new kid on the block with the Black Country. So we're trying to put our arms around them and help them and support them get up to speed.
So I think Jim Harvey has posted something in the chat which clarifies that a little in terms of the size and scale. Right, so we're just at 3 o'clock now. I've got one last question, and then we'll see if anybody else wants to come in with any more before we wind it up. Can anybody now join subsequently the cluster if a company wants to jump in? Is it possible?
There isn't anything to join at the moment. We are still this informal grouping. We're just working through Welsh Government now, just writing the business case now. So we're probably going to do something very, very similar to NECUS, but that has to be decided and signed off by ministers. But in the meantime, if people want to connect and be part of our email groups and meetings, then just email. The collaboration agreement we've done for Cluster Plan in particular enables us to add people, and we'll learn and develop as we go through with that one. But we're open to talk, discuss, and we need help. So please.
There's your advert. Okay, great. Right, last opportunity if anybody would like to make a comment or ask a question. Other than that, we're pretty much out of time. How long is long enough?
I'll just make a point that I will. Do I get a copy of these questions and comments? Thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to pass that to Karis, but I think the answer is yes.
I'm more than happy to send you over a copy, Chris.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yes, there's some good links in there, isn't there?
Yeah.
Nice. There you go. Great. I think we're done. Thank you very much. I was really impressed by the turnout. We had almost 70 people at one point, so the turnout has been fantastic. I think we've had a lot of benefit from what's been said here, and the cluster has been framed in such a way that it should be very clear as to what is happening and what the opportunities are as this goes forward. So let's thank Chris one more time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for listening.
Feel free to post thanks in the chat box. That's the modern way of doing it, I guess, or applause emoji, I suppose. So I'll hand back to Caris now. Are there any, do you want to give an ad for the next upcoming event?
I'd love to give an ad for the next upcoming
Fire away.
So first of all, I just want to say thank you, Chris, and thank you, Richard, as well for chairing today. Yeah, it was really great to hear from you, and thank you everyone for an engaged kind of Q&A and discussion time as well. That's been great. So next week, we're actually hearing from the Scotland cluster. So we'll have an update from them with Mike Smith from Nexus and Charlie Hartley from Pale Blue Dot as well. So same time, Thursday, 2 o'clock, and hopefully see lots of you there next week as well. So thank you, everyone. And thank you, Chris and Richard.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Thanks all.